Hello and a very warm WACL welcome to you all. I'm Jackie Stevenson, President of WACL and the founding partner and CEO of the Brooklyn Brothers, and we're delighted to have you here with us today for Why the Future of Work is Flexible First, our WACL webinar. Today in our webinar, we'll be examining the future of work and the role of flexible working in all its forms as we emerge from lockdown and finally begin to head back to the office. For those of you who don't know WACL, let me tell you a little bit more about us. WACL, which stands for Women in Advertising and Communications Leadership, is an active club of influential women in marketing, media, the creative industries and communications. And our aim is to accelerate gender equality for the benefit of all. As leaders ourselves, we are determined to use our power and influence to change our own workplaces, in the work that we do and the communities we operate in. As part of this, we campaign for change to drive gender equality. And our recent work has included campaigns to close the gender pay gap, address the representation of women in the media, and eradicate sexual harassment in our industry via our support for Time 2. Encouraging all companies to adopt flexible working as a norm has been the focus of our campaigning attention at WACL this year, as providing employees with the ability to work flexibly, we know is one of the largest levers we have to increase workplace diversity and make a huge difference at every level to gender equality. So today we've allowed just over an hour for the whole event, so please expect us to finish by about 1:30. In a moment, we'd love to start by taking the temperature of how you, the audience, are feeling about flexible working with an anonymous poll, which should appear on your screens in a second. We'll check in again at the end of the webinar, so please stand by for that. We'll then kick off with Mel Exon, our WACL leader and member of our campaigning team, who'll talk about why flexible working is such an important tool to help us move the dial on gender equality and why we spent the last 9 months campaigning. I'm delighted to say we'll then be joined by 3 phenomenal leaders who have different but equally informed and enlightening perspectives: Annie Auerbach, Sinead Rocks and Rania Robinson. The panel will be moderated by our brilliant Sume Thompson, a fellow WACL leader and campaigning team member, who'll be asking each of the panelists to share their experience. Then we're keen to take questions and as a group share thoughts on how to capitalise on this extraordinary moment. Now, you know the drill. Please put your questions in the Zoom Q&A, and we'll also be monitoring the chat for any questions we get there too. We've already had a couple of questions sent in, but we really want to hear from you, so please don't hold back. We'll then close with our committee chair of WACL campaigning, Catherine Becker, who will share WACL's thoughts on how we can build back better in all our workplaces. But as I said, before we start, we'd love to take the temperature on how flexible working is currently operating in all of your organisations. You should be able to see the poll now. And what we want to do is find out, how confident do you feel about flexible working in your workplace? Are you confident that your culture is all in for flexible working and already flexible first, or is it piecemeal but there's a plan in place? Or is flexibility just talked about but there's still a bit of a stigma attached to it? Or really has your workplace not embraced flexible working at all? We're just going to give a few more seconds for everyone to fill out that poll and we see where we are before we start our webinar. Great, okay, the results are in. It's brilliant to see that over half of you are confident that the culture is all in for flexible working and already starting to be flexible first, which is just so brilliant to hear. But the other half is saying it's piecemeal or it's talked about, but there's still a stigma attached. So we've always got work to do, and there's so much more we can do to help our employees become more flexible and help our workplaces begin to really move forward in putting together structures and helping everyone be flexible first. So let's kick off. I'm delighted to hand over to Mel.
Thank you, Jackie, and good afternoon, everyone. Last year, as Jackie was saying, WACL began leading a call for organisations to become flexible first. Simply put, to offer genuine two-way flexible working in all its forms and at scale, from day one of employment. Our motivation for this was simple and still is. We have over a decade of research and evidence showing flexible working works. Our case studies from several WACL leaders you can see here, and more in fact, working at the forefront of flexible working, inside the likes of Channel 4, Unilever, Mars, Vodafone, ITV, and Mumsnet, to name a few, prove that flexible working accelerates gender equality for all, significant benefits for all employees, regardless of gender. Those benefits are unpacked in full on our website, WACL.info, in case you want to bookmark the page right now on screen. Jess is just adding a link in unlocking our productivity potential improvement and building corporate resilience. So what about the bigger picture? For all the seismic shifts affecting our workplaces today, the longer term outlook looks certain in a few respects. We will all have to work for longer than our parents did. And as automation and AI grow, we know the nature of that work, and the skills required of us humans to deliver it will change. In the near term, we also know the impact of a global pandemic, in this context at least, has offered us a once in a generation opportunity, a chance to reimagine what the future of work really looks like. None of us dreamt the social experiment of remote working would last quite this long, nor usher in changes that would have taken a decade or two to deliver under different circumstances. Nor did we know that prioritizing improved employee well-being, diversity, inclusion, and belonging were board-level goals at long last. We now need tangible action to make these goals become a reality and really stick. Fortunately, flexible working is a proven, powerful lever to do so. Fortunately, I say, because we still have several urgent threats to address, amongst them issues like the well-known stats we've all seen about how the pandemic policy response has disproportionately impacted women and minorities. Less likely to have been furloughed on full pay, more likely to resign or lose their jobs. And to put that into hard numbers, a macroeconomic study by the National Bureau of Economic Research in the US predicts that the gender pay gap alone will worsen by 5 percentage points and take 2 decades to recover from if we don't take steps to address it. The good news is we also have research from the University of Kent, have a fantastic study in the UK amongst 40,000 households, showing that working mothers are twice as likely to stay in work and therefore progress into higher paid roles if they're offered flexible working. Then we have the notable gap in supply and demand. Only 6 out of 10 men and women in the UK feel able to work flexibly in practice, whilst 9 out of 10 men and women do want to work flexibly. And only 22% of jobs in 2020, so even during the pandemic, at its height, I guess, only 22% of jobs were advertised as flexible in the UK, whilst research from the Behavioural Insights team shows offering flexible working explicitly in job ads would increase applications by up to 30%. And finally, a particularly hot topic, the same Behavioural Insights team published just last month in May, when employers insist on a hard and fast number of days that hybrid workers should spend at home after COVID, this could create a gender gap, as they term it. In their trial, what actually happened was that the women reduced their intentions to work from home by around a quarter of a day per week, 8%, in response to the intervention messages, while men's intentions, interestingly enough, did not change. It's also likely to only satisfy a minority of staff, even if the average preference is used. Whereas companies, on the flip side, in a positive sense, are likely to fare better if they avoid setting quotas and adopt a test and learn approach instead. It's certainly clear we all need to be smart about how we go about going back to work and adopting flexible working in all its forms and at scale, which is happily what the rest of today's session is all about. How do you shift from managing people's time to managing people's energy? How do you attract and retain a wider pool of the very best talent? And what happens to that elusive magic ingredient we call culture? To that end, I am delighted to introduce Sue May Thompson, who will get into the how with each of our guest speakers, a fellow WACL leader and campaigning team member. Sue May is the CEO of Media Trust, the non-profit organisation that works in partnership with the media and creative industries to give charities, marginal, so a commissioner at the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Sue May, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mel. And hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So Mel, to pick up on your last point that employers should beware of insisting on a hard and fast number of days back in the office, I'm sure many people tuning in have been watching events unfold at Apple over the weekend, and how Apple employees are pushing back against a letter from Tim Cook proposing that from September, they spend 3 days in the office and the other 2 at home or working remotely. Well, this issue is obviously bigger than Apple, if anything can be bigger than Apple, and a challenge that many employers are having to grapple with. Here to share their perspectives on how we can make flexible working work and why it's so important are 3 phenomenal leaders: Annie Auerbach, founder of Starling and author of Flex; Sinead Rocks, Channel 4's MD of Nations and Regions; and Rania Robinson, CEO and partner at Quiet Storm. So welcome everyone. And Annie, we're going to start with you. So if you could pop your camera on, that would be brilliant.
Hi, Sue. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Great. Have we got Annie on screen? Yeah, brilliant. Great. So Annie, as you heard from Jackie, WACL have been campaigning for Flexible First for several months now, because we know flexible working is a powerful lever to drive gender equality in the workplace. But your lens was a bit different, wasn't it? So why did you write Flex?
Yes, well, clearly gender equality is a great lever to be pushing. But when I wrote Flex, I actually wrote it in 2018, and it was published in 2019 before the pandemic. And I was convinced that Flex was an ideology that had come of age. And part of the reason is, in my day job, I run a cultural insight studio called Starling. So we look at trends and the big societal shifts in order to help brands stay relevant. And with my Starling hat on, I'd been monitoring all these longer term trends. And I just thought this is an idea which is really coming to fruition. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. And in my wildest dreams, I couldn't have imagined the speed, blistering speed at which all this stuff that campaigners had been fighting for generations really suddenly happened. On a personal level, I had been flexing or trying to flex for about 15 years. I'd asked for flexible working at the business I used to work in, WACL, and I think I was the first person to ask for flexible working in the business. And at the time, it was quite tricky. There was a lot of stigma attached. We already saw with the poll that there's still people feeling that flex is associated with, flexism, if you like, prejudice against people who are flexing, that they are maybe out of sight, out of mind, less committed, and so on. And I definitely felt some of that the notion of the sticky floor, whereby when you managed to negotiate your flex, you were so grateful you kind of stuck where you were, and career progression was less of an option really. And I think on a very personal level, I was so grateful for the flex that I had negotiated, that I was performatively busy on the time that I had negotiated not to work. And I think, given the digital presenteeism that we've seen during the pandemic, I think that's an issue we really do need to grapple with. So I wrote the book as a kind of marriage between popular sociology and the big trends that I was seeing that had built up to this moment, and also a kind of personal handbook or Bible of the tips and strategies that I wish I'd been able to read 20 years ago.
Great. So you alluded to those macro trends that illustrate that flexibility is an ideology that's now come of age. Could you expand on that?
Yes, of course. So I deliberately wrote the book as work was one of the chapters, but there were other chapters because I felt that work intersects clearly with so many other different areas of our lives. And the 4 big trends that I'd like to just chat about, there's so many really, but these 4 that I'd like to chat about at the moment are what I witnessed and why I thought we were at this very tipping point moment. So for a start, we in the UK have some of the longest working hours in Europe. So we average about 42 hours per week, which is nearly 2 hours more than the EU average. So that works out as an extra 2.5 weeks a year. And clearly during the pandemic, this was escalated. The ONS found that people working from home were putting in an average of 6 hours of unpaid overtime a week. But that really wasn't translating into productivity. And in fact, burnout had become an issue in the workplace long before the pandemic. So the World Health Organization recently released a report showing that long working hours are killing hundreds of thousands of people a year, killing them from stroke and heart disease due to long, they made the link to long hours globally. And yet this crisis of productivity was happening before the pandemic. So it was a sort of situation of burnt out bums on seats. Our productivity in the UK is near the bottom of the G7 league table. So the average French worker produces more by the end of Thursday than the UK worker does in a whole week. So there's definitely something that needed unpicking here. Why were we so wedded to this very long hours presenteeism culture, even though we were, in practical terms, not producing more? It felt like there was something to unpick there. The second big theme is around self-knowledge and the fact that our technologies are allowing us to really understand our bodies and our minds in such a crystallized way now. So self-optimization trend has been bubbling on for a long time. Of course, it started with things like pedometers, but now we know so much about the way we work, our rhythms, our sleep patterns. And why then were we forced into the rigidity of this 9 to 5, which feels like for so many of us, whether we're early morning larks or late night owls, it's not capitalizing on the point where we were energized and we were performing at our very best. It's really interesting, for example, that Nike for the first time started talking about exercise routines which sync with your menstrual cycle. That for me was fascinating. For the first time, understanding your body could allow you to optimize your fitness routines. And it just felt like also the more we understood about creativity, we realized we did need these periods of rest and recuperation. 1 in 5 founders came up with the idea for their startup whilst on vacation. Although, Americans probably have longer working hours than the UK. So it felt that this self-knowledge moment that we were going through would help us optimize and make our routines and our rhythms more flexible so that we can work and live at our best, really. And the next thing, the next big theme that was bubbling under was, of course, something that you talked about so beautifully in the introduction, which is the gender inequality. And I looked at it through the lens of home. The modern workplace has had this patriarchal vision of commitment through long working hours and stamina. And actually, when we try and unpick that, we realize that the emotional load at home is not very well shared. And during the pandemic, that fell on women's shoulders more than ever. And so it felt like we needed to really understand how we're conditioning young girls from a very early age to take on that emotional load and understand how we can tweak that later on in our lives, because it does result in some quite difficult stats, really. And I looked into the motherhood penalty and the fatherhood boost. So when men become fathers, their salary increases with employers viewing them as more dependable. And it feels like fatherhood is a valuable characteristic of employers, but the opposite pattern emerges when we look at motherhood and women's wages, and each child costs women, and they face a motherhood penalty. They experience a decrease in their earning potential. Clearly, this was an issue that we needed to deal with societally. And finally, one other theme which you touched on earlier on as well is the aging demographic. fact that we're living longer lives, we're living longer careers. More than a third of the UK's total workforce is over 50. So how can we think more flexibly and sustainably about that longer term life and career, and think about how we can pivot and retrain and reskill. So those were the big areas that made me feel really that this is a point of change that we're witnessing right now.
That was just brilliant. I'm so impressed by the amount of research you obviously did. I would love to know if you were an early morning lark or a nighttime owl when you were running your agency and writing your book, and balancing everything else.
Yeah, I am an early morning lark, actually, and I'm not sure if I've been conditioned in having 2 small kids and that's been forced upon me, but it does feel, I remember when I used to take the tube into work, and I would spend the moments where my brain was most productively and the ideas were buzzing. I spent that time under someone's armpit in a sweaty tube. So it does feel like if you can tweak your day, even just the rhythm of your day to work with you, that's a big breakthrough.
Flexible working. Last question for you. I know that you think this is a pivotal time for society to make really significant changes in the way we work. It's not just about, is it 2 or is it 3 days in the office, right? It's going to be much more extensive change than that, really, to support your vision for the future of work. So can you expand a bit on that for us?
Yes, I feel like we're in this very, very profound moment, almost like a once in a generation chance to really think intentionally about how we work and how we live. And I'm slightly frustrated with the short-termism and the obsession of nailing down new models, whether it be 2 or 3 days a week. You've already mentioned Apple and Tim Cook. Interestingly, the letter that the employees wrote protesting against that talked about the fact that they felt during this period of flexibility, they had done the best work of their careers. That's super interesting to me, because it's not just about getting through it. It's clearly been a sort of very difficult time, but it's an opening up, a kind of awakening of how we could live. And so I think we need to sort of almost leapfrog the discussions around trying to nail down new models and not really I mean, Mel already talked about the behavioural insights team and the fact that when you do nail it down, either women lose out or you end up doing an average, which suits very few people. So I sort of feel there's an opportunity to think so differently and to think ambitiously about how society wants to be. For me, there is some really interesting data that came out around the climate crisis, and the 4-day working week would slash the UK's carbon footprint. And the study that was done by the 4-day week campaign showed that moving to a 4-day week would shrink the UK's emission by 2025 by a reduction of about 20%. That's the equivalent of taking the country's entire private car fleet off the road. It's fascinating. More work needs to be done here on how flexible working can impact climate. I also think there's something profound to be done around loneliness. Loneliness epidemic has been huge prior to the pandemic, and even more so since we've been social distancing. When we spend more time in our local communities, we're spending time that otherwise we would be commuting or sort of schlepping into the central business district. We invest in them, we spend more time in them, we meet, we care for our neighbours. Neighbourhoods aren't dormitories, but are actually living, breathing spaces, and I'm excited by that. I feel like we need to do something profound in this moment about thinking about mental health and work. I just read a brilliant book by Elizabeth Yuva-Beneni, which is called the Reset, and she talked about millennials and how burnt out they are, but also about why we pour so much of our identities into work. And I think we've witnessed what Naomi Osaka is doing, which is absolutely brave and brilliant in the sense that she's prioritizing her mental health over the ambitions of the systems that profit from her. And I think more and more we'll be able to understand, once we unpick our relationship and with our identity and work, how we can reprioritize mental health. So it feels like this is a moment of kind of ambition, and we have this chance to be architects of a new way of living and working, and we should think big, really.
Well, thank you so much. That was so inspiring, and I think we need to send a copy of your book to Apple to encourage them not to think incrementally, but to make that kind of giant leap forward. So if anyone else would like to hear more of Annie's views, her book Flex comes with a heap of admiring endorsements and positive reviews, and is available at Waterstones and on Amazon. So thank you so much, Annie. Thank you. So I'm going to turn now to Sinead. Annie, you come off and hi, Sinead. Welcome. So we've just been hearing from Annie why she feels so passionately about the need for societal change and ways of working. So you're at the centre of that revolution for Channel 4 in your role, leading the delivery of Channel 4's For All the UK strategy and the opening of your new Leeds HQ. And you were appointed to your role pre-COVID, if I'm right, in 2019. So can we start your journey there by describing what did the Channel 4 workplace look like back then?
Sure, thank you for having me. I suppose it's worth pointing out there's a little bit of a juxtaposition between Channel 4's on-air image and the reality of working for it as an organisation. So on air, we're known to be a bit edgy, we're known to be a bit alternative. In reality, Channel 4 was quite a traditional organisation, and I joined to help lead the biggest change to its structure in its history. So pre-pandemic, we were an organisation going through just a huge amount of organizational and structural transformation. So traditionally, since its incarnation, Channel 4 had been a one-site organization. A separate sales office elsewhere had sprung up, but it was very self-contained. It was very much an organization where you could pop across the floor or pop down in a lift and speak to whoever you wanted, because people were always there. And my role was to lead an expansion of the organisation, opening new offices in Glasgow and in Bristol and a new HQ in Leeds. And the thinking for us in all of that was, as a broadcaster and as a public service broadcaster, we needed to be as representative of the UK as a whole. And if we were all based in one office in London, living very similar lives, then how could we hope to be representative of people and different life experiences and the diversity of UK living? So it was a massive change, and it was a rocky road. We opened the last of our offices about 3 months before the first lockdown. And I look back and cannot quite believe that my days were spent trying to convince colleagues in London to use video calling technology. And at the time we used Skype. And I needed to be really clear with the London staff, and the rest of my exec colleagues are all based in London, that they needed to be as inclusive as possible, and video calling was going to become a part and parcel of our daily lives. There was let's say, a reluctance to fully embrace it, because if you weren't used to using it, it was a bit of a pain in the arse. Didn't always work. I saw a lot of people's sort of cleavage as they were fiddling with cameras in meeting rooms that were beautifully kitted out, but not quite, if you weren't trained, it's problematic. And I would have a stream of people based in the nations and regions coming to me saying they forgot to call me again. So pre-pandemic, this was all very new and embryonic technology for us. Channel 4 had in fact only moved away from desktops to laptops about 11 months before that. So, I mean, I dread to think what COVID would have meant had those changes not happened. But we were an organisation that were absolutely, very focused on presenteeism, very traditional, very sort of not 9 to 5, sort of 8 until 6. It was about the hours you spent sat at a desk, and it was freaking people out that all of a sudden some members of their team may be based 200 miles away. Little did we know then what that would all end up looking like.
Wow. So you started the journey pre-COVID and then lockdown happened. So what happened then?
It was exactly a week before the official lockdown, and like many people, we were beginning to sense where this could potentially be going. So we decided to do a working from home trial and got everyone in the organization to work from home, to iron through the logistics of what that could mean. Because for us, we have to keep a certain amount of channels on air. There are things that we can't press the pause button on while we work out what we're doing. So there was a massive logistical challenge. And I think kind of at that time we thought, this is us being brilliantly forward thinking, and bet it'll never come to this, but let's be prepared. And there was probably a bit of a frisson of excitement about it all at that point, because it felt like this absolutely imaginary hypothetical challenge that may or may not come in our direction. But we got everyone working from home very quickly. The real lockdown happened and there was no option about the working from home, and we managed to keep things going initially in those early days, probably by the skin of our teeth, because we were having to find massive workarounds. We were having to shutter our buildings and still keep all the Channel 4 services going. So some people immediately find themselves slightly cast adrift, because what they were doing in the short term wasn't as urgent as some of the more technical roles. And so we had this very mixed economy of staff, where some of them were working probably 20 hours a day in those very early days, and others were left sat at home feeling quite isolated and going, goodness, what does this mean to me if it goes on for any length of time? So it was a massive people challenge.
Gosh. Just on that people challenge, we've seen, kind of what's happening, in other organizations. So it's really, we're really interested in, I think, the philosophy at Channel 4, because we were really lucky to interview Alex Mann for our Flexible First series of interviews with media and creative leaders. And she made the really interesting point, which, I think is relevant in the whole kind of standoff context at Apple, that actually employers need to think about how they can use COVID to facilitate the changes that people want to make in their lives, rather than go back to a world where we were kind of suppressing that. So is that the philosophy that imbued your design brief for the new Channel 4 headquarters? And a bit more about what that's going to look like.
Yeah, sure. So we're very lucky. We've got a very forward-thinking CEO who's one of her driving forces is, if I have happy and motivated staff, Channel 4 is going to be its best self. So I guess that was our starting position. I mean, and I found myself smiling during Annie's speech, because where we have landed in Channel 4 is we started off as an organization that was very obsessed with presenteeism, and we are going through a bit of a test and learn approach. The vast majority of our staff are not back in any of our offices yet. They are unlikely to be before September, and by then people will have been out for the guts of 18 months. We are starting with what we're calling a 50-50 manifesto, because we think from masses of staff engagement that we want to be together part of the time, and we don't want to be together the rest of the time. So we have gone a little bit Apple in that regard, but I have slight more confidence than maybe Tim Cook has at the minute on how this will work, because I think one of the things that is important is there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach for every organization, because we all do different things. Our 50-50 manifesto has come through staff engagement, and more importantly, probably from a flexibility point of view, is the bigger shift for us is not about being present in an office or working remotely, although that is significant at Channel 4. More importantly is flexibility on how you do your work and when you do your work. So moving away from hours sat at a desk to being measured on the outputs. So being much clearer about, if you are someone who wants to, I've myself got a 19-month-old baby. There are times of the day when I need to be bathing that baby and I want to be reading that baby a story. And if that means I log in later on in the evening, that's absolutely my choice, you know. And so that's the bigger shift for us. But where that has led us is, well, if people are only coming into the office part-time, how do we make that as intentional as possible? If people have the choice of working remotely, what is an office experience going to be like? And at Channel 4, through the staff engagement piece that we've done over the past year, people miss the social aspect, they miss the camaraderie, they miss those chats that lessen the cognitive load that you feel when you're on endless Zooms all day. They miss the spontaneity, they miss the kind of things that lead to a little bit of magic when you bump into someone who's outside of your normal, you know, schedule of diary meetings that day. You don't get that working remotely. So we're very lucky in that we were at the stage of designing our new national headquarters in Leeds throughout this flexible working planning period. And so we've tried to make it radically different to other Channel 4 offices to facilitate the kind of things we think our staff are going to want when they come into an office. And we've done it in a way that is flexible because we are going to test and iterate, but also because far be it from me to impose how I think staff should use the building. You know, I can make calculated assumptions, I can use research, and I can consult with experts, but actually I'd much rather put the building together in a way that then staff work out what is best for them. But in our new building, and Alex Mahon has been very key to at promoting and pushing us to be as radical as possible. We're moving away from the kind of call center look that a lot of our offices currently have, with fixed desks and loads of equipment. Yes, there will be some of them, but more importantly, we're into collaboration spaces. We're into little spots where you can go for a moment of privacy rather than somewhere you want to sit all day. We've gone for big tables for people to get together to chat. We've gone for creative spaces so that you can have brainstorms and sit in a more comfortable and relaxed environment. So we think it's about encourage you want to create the physical environment that excites people on the days that they are coming into work. You want it to feel like the commute is worthwhile. You want it to feel like people are getting a chance to re-energize and to be with their colleagues and to feel part of a wider organization, because, you know, we've talked a lot about flexibility being an aid to mental health. Remote working can be very isolating, and we've seen that from some of our staff as well, that can be problematic. So we're trying to work with our teams and with our leaders and with our broader workforce to try to work out what is our reset moment. What do we want Channel 4 to be in a way where all of us can be hyper productive at home and hyper productive in the office as well.
Oh my gosh, that it just sounds amazing, and I cannot wait. Are you going to invite us to come and visit Leeds when it opens? When does it open?
We are a month away now. Well,
really, really good luck with completing that, meeting that deadline. And yeah, we'd all love to come and visit. Thank you so much, Sinead. Thank you for sharing, you know, those insights from within Channel 4. I feel I was on the floor listening to you, and I'm sure there's a lot of excitement in the workforce. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to turn to Rania. So Rania, hello. Hi. So we've heard from Annie why society needs to rethink work-life balance. We've heard from Sinead how a major organization like Channel 4 is rising to the challenge of the new era. So clearly everyone in the creative industries is trying to figure out what this all means for them. And, you know, we'd just love to hear from you what your thoughts are on this. Can we start with, how was lockdown for you and your colleagues at Quiet Storm? Did you love it or did you hate it?
Well, I suppose you're a combination of both, probably, to be fair, and it changed as time went on. I think how we felt at the beginning actually changed quite a bit towards how we felt at the end. I think initially, we, you know, similar to Sinead, we'd kind of preempted it a bit, so we'd kind of got ourselves ready and prepared, kind of practically and mentally for it. And then, so when it kind of, when the time came, we were kind of ready to go. And actually, I think initially we were all really pleasant, probably along with many people, really pleasantly surprised with actually how easily we adapted, and actually how good outcomes were. Actually, I mean, the thought someone had said to me, 6 months earlier that this was the way it was going to be, and we were going to be winning pitches, and we were going to be producing great work, and finding ways to connect, I would have not believed it. So sorry, that's my dog. I'm just going to stop scratching. So that was the kind of initial response, was really pleasantly surprised. I think instinctively as a business, we've always been quite flexible. Actually, when we're kind of creative agency and a production company, so we're used to working with people who work sort of out of the office or aren't kind of working fixed times or in fixed locations. We've had quite a few people working shorter weeks or working from home, and so it's always instinctively it's kind of not been an issue for us. And I think that what comes with that is trust. You have to trust the people you work with, and we've kind of got those, and we work a lot with freelancers as well, so we kind of got into that mentality of the trust component of flexible working, if you like, but actually we've never really seen it as something that we could all do and we could all do effectively before, and it hasn't been a company policy. It's been very much treated on a case by case basis. So I think that was something that was a really pleasant surprise. We even found ways to socially connect that was really positive as well, particularly when it was absolute lockdown. And of course, people were just home and didn't really have much else to do. So would make sure they came on to sort of Zoom drinks or Zoom activities that we did. But we were very conscious to make sure that we were doing regular pulse checks with people and kind of understanding the individual's experience as well as the collective experience, because it did differ, as you would expect. Your home environment, in some cases your personal life experience, not life experiences, but your personal setup, if you like, whether you're sharing with a ton of other people and don't have brilliant Wi-Fi, or whether you're trying to homeschool, young kids are also at home and various things. So the experience did vary for people, but I think what came as a universal positive feedback was that actually people were finding ways to sort of fit other things that matter to them in their lives into their lives through this new way of working, and we kind of figured it out and made it work. And I think it actually created a sense of camaraderie, because we all had to sort of come together and actually adapt to each other and be sensitive and respectful of each other's sort of schedules and preferences and personal situations as well, and it just kind of worked. So I think that was very much the early experience, and certainly for a good sort of probably the first year, I think none of us were expecting that we were going to be going into a kind of second kind of quite sort of lengthy wave of working from home. And so I think as time went on and as we did sort of pulse checks, the cracks started to show a little bit with some things, certainly with the newer, younger members of staff who didn't necessarily have the same home comforts of working at home, didn't necessarily have the space or the great Wi-Fi, or and also felt they needed a lot more kind of one-on-one personal input. So I think that was very much the case. There was also situations just in terms of what became very obvious was that everything became very task-led, which is great, and it's great for productivity and it's great for getting things done. But you start to realize after a period of time that actually what's being lost is the less kind of obvious things, the softer things, the potential, the opportunity, the kind of those sort of random conversations that end up happening just because you've got somebody across the table from you, people that you don't necessarily work with every day, that you might have a conversation or bounce an idea off, or that off the cuff conversation you have when you sit on the sofas for lunch. Or so they were the things that were getting a bit lost. And that's also the sense of camaraderie after the initial novelty of, right, we're in the trenches, we've got to get through this. Once that sort of wore off, you could see an element of bonding was being lost as well, or it happened very much within micro groups, people that were working very, very specifically on a particular job together rather than the company as a whole. So I definitely, and as we did sort of pulse checks further in, we started to realize that not everybody was enjoying the experience quite in the same way. I think what people loved was the flexibility, but not necessarily the being at home aspect of it. So and as Sinead's covered off, there's a lot more to flexibility than where you work. It's how you work, and what hours you work. And so yeah, that was how the kind of the journey that we've been on. So we're in the process of kind of exploring how we make it work for everybody.
Yeah, well, we'll come to that. I think it's so interesting that how, kind of despite so much interaction being online, I think, there's absolutely something very rich in what you say, that I think a lot of us saw our colleagues more fully in a way, and a more kind of multi-dimensional understanding of their lives. But as things have worn on, I think, there are trade-offs, I think, that, people can clearly identify need to be made. The next few months are going to be a massive kind of transitioning, aren't they? And what do you think are the major hurdles and major opportunities really for the creative industries as we think about, kind of that transition and moving to the new normal?
I mean, I think the biggest opportunity really is that we've been able to sort of redefine the way we work moving forward. And I think none of us want to go back to the way it was. We're all very, very clear on that. And actually, because of, people don't tend, we're creatures of habit really. And if it's kind of, people genuinely feel kind of uncomfortable with change until, sometimes it's forced upon you, and then you realize actually that's been really good for me and good for the organization. I think that's definitely what's happened. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop my dog from scratching. So I think that the natural instinct is it can make people feel quite uncomfortable change. And I think what we found is actually we've been through the most kind of radical, swift change that we've probably experienced in, since I personally can remember, and actually it's turned out really well. So I think what we've got is lots of an openness to doing things very differently. I think what we're trying to do is sort of define what that means in a world that is part office, part remote, different, broadly what the full spectrum of flexibility, knowing that there's people that definitely want those opportunities to connect and be together and be in the office, and people wanting sort of different things. So how do you make it work for everybody? And I think that is the real exploration process we're going through at the moment. And I think for us, it's an element of let's try some stuff out and see how it works, and then kind of define and redefine and tweak from there. So, we the particular challenge I think we found, and I'm a director of an organisation called Create Not Hate, which is something that I set up with my husband, and its aim is to bring in underrepresented young people into our industry. And what we're doing is we're bringing people into the industry that haven't followed the traditional paths into the industry. They haven't necessarily got parents that been in the industry or have worked in a similar industry where they've got that kind of understanding of how it works, or they've not necessarily gone to classic traditional educational route in through university or through an art college, or so what we're finding is, particularly with those, and not just those, other sort of more traditional graduates and people coming in, is that they need an environment that's going to sort of take into account the differences in their levels of comfort and knowledge and understanding and the footing that they have as they come in. So you can't sort of treat every person in the same way and do a fixed kind of way of working, or not, well, when I say fixed, almost like a fixed flexible way of working, because you have to be able to account for the fact that whilst it might work for some people to be working on certain hours or out of the office on specific days, it might not be in the best interests of some of these younger people coming in who need to be able to learn through osmosis, learn through hearing people in the office and hearing conversations and being exposed to people they might not ordinarily be exposed to in a day-to-day setting, or be in a situation where they feel comfortable on a video call sort of pointing out that, actually, sorry, can you just explain what that means, because it's not terminology I understand. So I think there's a lot of things that you have to think about, and you've got to think about making it work for everyone. I think that's kind of the real challenge, I think.
I'm so glad you mentioned Create Not Hate. I'm a huge admirer of what you've done there, and I'm just glad that we can give it a shout out as well on this call. I think adopting a one-size-fits-all is obviously not going to be a popular solution, or necessarily one that's going to work. At WACL, we obviously are about women and gender, but I know that you think a lot about intersectionality. And I think, as you've already touched on, I think intersectionality and kind of flexible working are really linked, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think definitely the more we want to encourage and support and create the right environment for a diverse workforce, that creates even more of a need for flexibility, because again, it sort of takes into account people's personal circumstances. You know, whether that is your kind of home life situation. Some people, you know, are in don't have the benefit of lots of support at home, you know, whether that's childcare or other support that makes it really easy for them to be in the office for as long as they need to be, or, you know, available at a kind of drop of a hat. Not everybody's in that position, particularly if we're looking at kind of women, absolutely, but also socioeconomically as well. You know, some people have to rely on family or other support networks within their kind of community, so they're not necessarily able to just have somebody sort of on tap as and when they need them. And so there's that, but also on a more personal level in terms of just allowing people to have kind of a life that is going to support kind of their own personal values, their own kind of the things they need to keep the balance with their mental health. So even if it's just about fitting in a fitness routine, you know, just being able to work flexibly has meant that, you know, people can sort of fit their fitness and their health regimes in and around their work in a way that they probably couldn't in a more fixed way of working. So I think that's the real benefit. I think for the fact of the flexible working is it opens up so much more opportunity for so many different needs and types of people, and people from, you know, different personal experiences and life stages. So that's been, I think, one of the most sort of exciting things about this.
Absolutely. So I do, and Media Trust does a lot of work with disability, and, you know, really for so many disabled people who have mobility issues. You know, the experience of lockdown was, well, welcome to our world, right? So, you know, I'm just so hopeful that, you know, that the new era is going to be really good for disabled people. But thank you so much, Rania, really, really thank you. And for sharing your experiences and your insights. That was so interesting. And like all the conversations that we've had with our brilliant panelists today. I wish we had more time together, but I have an eye on the clock. And now we're going to go to audience Q&A, which Mel is going to come back to moderate. Mel, handing back to you.
Thank you, Sume. Amazing insights from all three contributors. Thank you so much. I particularly loved An Awakening of How We Could Live from Annie. That felt very inspiring. Sinead, spaces that make you feel that the commute was worthwhile. Yes, amen to that, please. And Rania, the more we want to create an environment for our diverse workforce, the more you need to offer flexibility. All brilliant, and so much more than I've just briefly mentioned. We have had lots of questions coming in via the chat straight to all panelists, and then we've got two questions of the three in the Q&A that are quite similar, all really good. I'm actually going to go to one of the questions in the Q&A first, because I think it is almost the elephant in the room, where we are seeing so much research saying do not enforce, if you like, a one-size-fits-all solution. And yet, as the questions from Amanda Stanford and Emma Burley intimate, half the problem is, though, that a lot of the workforce are also saying, I quote Amanda, we're finding people are waiting to be told. They are really looking for clear direction. Many people calling for structure and rules about how to be flexible. How do you balance that central messaging, as Emma Burley put it? I was wondering if Sinead would like to take that question.
It's a really pertinent question. So our starting point is what we've called a 50-50 manifesto, which is not hard and fast rules. It's about setting out an expectation, which is really based on trust in the first instance. And it's a little bit of an acknowledgement of the things that we believe worked well during lockdown and the things that we felt we missed. And it's all massively informed by staff engagement. So it's playing back what we have been told, what I have been told by staff over the past year. But we know that we have we've still got those people who want hard and fast rules. And so to come out with a manifesto rather than a policy is quite a radical departure for us. So we're investing in it. We have hired consultants that we're working really closely with. And over the next few months, as we run up to September, they will be working with teams to work out what it means on a team by team basis, rather than on a, this is what it's going to look like for the entirety of Channel 4. And that's everything from, if you're a manager and you're chairing a meeting where some of the participants are working remotely and some are in the room, what's the best practice for that? To working with staff as they look at their schedule for the week and start to figure out how they need to rearrange it so that if they're working remotely, they're getting the kind of quiet things done, or the things that involve sitting with the headphones on at the laptop. And if they're going to come into the office, they've got the space to breathe and to chat to other people. So really, our approach here is provide a lot of support, provide a lot of stimulus, deliver that support in a workshop context to enable staff to take what we have provided is really a rough framework and an aspiration of what we want the outcomes to be. But actually, we think the way it will stick is if staff can actually shape it themselves, because we won't have thought of everything. You know, there's a frequently asked questions document. And I think another 2 questions get added to it every hour. It's like watching a ticker going through. But nor should we be presenting something as a fait accompli. I think, you know, we are taking incremental approach. We are testing and learning, but for us, that is our giant leap. And that's how we hope we will make this land.
I love the idea of freedom within a framework. So you're not leaving people rudderless, you're giving them clear understanding, but you're also really listening to their actual experience. Makes an awful lot of sense to me. I can tell Annie would like to contribute, and I'd love to hear what you think, Annie. Please, fire away.
I loved what you just said, Sinead, about this moment that we're working through and how you're dealing with it. I think it's a real moment for adaptive leadership, because you know, Flex shouldn't be about chaos. It shouldn't be about everybody doing different things and everyone feeling rudderless. It should be a moment where, you know, people can look within and find the rhythms that work for them, and also the stuff that works for the company as well. So, you know, Flex needs hard edges. And I write about in the book that, you know, just because you're being flexible, it doesn't mean you should bend over backwards and everything should blur. And you know, your working life completely meanders with your home life. So it needs hard edges. But I also think it's exactly this test and learn, this work in progress. We talk about experiments, but what does that actually mean? That means sort of going, I don't have all the answers right now. And we're still listening, and we will build, as you say, the ticker tape of Q&As, or we will build our approach as we go. It's this massively brave and exciting thing to do, I think.
Wonderful. I'm going to move to another question now. So Carol Ray asked that she'd heard on the first slide, I think it actually was my slide, talking about very recent research from BIT that men and women's attitudes in terms of going back to the office actually differ. And she was asking for any texture behind that as to why. The stat really was based upon, if you enforce, you know, particular stipulations around the number of days, that engenders a different reaction, and it's a gendered reaction. I think I mentioned that, you know, women were actually dropping the number of days they wanted to work from home by about 8%. Annie, I feel like this might be something that you are particularly well placed to kind of offer some insight to. What do you think is driving that difference in response from women versus men?
Well, I think it's to do with what we've experienced during the pandemic. And we know that mums were twice as likely as dads to have lost their job or quit during the pandemic. And also, interestingly, mums had fewer hours of uninterrupted work time. And gosh, I really experienced that myself. It's very, you know, we talk about this idealistic moment of flow when we can work and get our stuff done. And actually, what we've had is very little of that as women. So it's a very different gendered response. And we've seen with the data that you talked about from the behavioural insights team that women seem to be on the verge of sacrificing their needs or compromising their intentions around work once a one-size-fits-all average mandate is put in place. And we've just got to be very, very sensitive about that, because it's a plastic moment at the moment, and to sort of nail it down, we could be excluding not only women but anyone who has flexible needs, whether that's about ability or disability or neurodiversity or anything. To shut that down again feels like a massive lost opportunity.
Yes. Rania, I'm going to move to a question for you, if I may. Obviously, the debate on return to the office has become pretty binary in the press. I'm very happy to hear that today's discussion has been far more nuanced than that. I know that one of the major objections to hybrid working amongst the creative industries tends to be around concerns about, will people be able to be innovative or creative when they're not together? I'd love for you to talk about your view and how you plan to optimize performance in that context.
Well, I think the creatives were actually, and this was quite mixed as well, but I think certainly Trevor, who heads up the creative side of the business, he found it very difficult, incredibly difficult, to be honest with you, as a creative who's used to bouncing ideas in a kind of informal setting, to be on a video call trying to kind of come up with ideas. It just felt almost kind of quite structured and a little bit kind of counterintuitive, but to create, what inspires ideas, I guess. So I think for him, definitely, I think they were one of the first to go back as well, actually, the creative department. I think they definitely felt the challenges with that. But I think it doesn't have to be in the office, though. I think it's about togetherness. It's not necessarily about being in a fixed, confined place and a fixed, confined moment. So I think for us, we did encourage opportunities for the creative teams to come together in real world settings, but not necessarily, in the kind of traditional structured way that we'd always experienced. And I mean, to be fair, from my personal sort of perspective on it, I don't think the work suffered necessarily. It sometimes was a bit harder getting there, maybe took a bit longer, but we definitely got to some brilliant work. I think it was really more the process maybe felt less enjoyable for the creative teams as well. And I definitely think those unexpected thoughts and ideas that come up spontaneously was definitely lost in that. But I think, again, it's really more about the togetherness than it is about the traditional way of doing things.
Absolutely, here. Thank you for that. Sinead, I'm wondering what your view on a sort of similar view about how do you ensure that staff feel, most engaged? What makes them feel most engaged? Not least with one another, right? And kind of beyond the office space that you're clearly really looking at long and hard. What do you think you need to invest in to optimize that?
I think it's about investing in people. I mean, I agree very much with what Rania has said. I think, in lockdown, we've become very task oriented. In Channel 4, we've actually become a little bit more siloed because we are having our day-to-day dealings with the people that we need to complete those tasks with, other than the people who might share a physical space. Channel 4's got very long tenure. Staff love it. It's a place that feels alive. There's a buzz and there's an energy and there's a pride at being part of this organization, and that just don't feel it in the same way when you're sat in your front a child's ball pit several feet away from me. I like to get away from ball pits when I'm going to work, and at the minute we don't have any options. So I think it's about investing in things that give you that reason to come to work, and investing in that sense of togetherness, and creating opportunities for people to break out of their silo and to spend time with people elsewhere in the organization. Because historically and anecdotally speaking to our staff over the past year, that's when great things have happened. It is whenever one person points something out to another person in another part of the business. Otherwise, we're just replicating systems and processes, and that way madness lies. So I think it's, for us, keeping that sense of what it means to be part of the Channel 4 family alive is going to be really central to whatever we do next.
Great, thank you. Annie, I have a follow-up question for you, if I may. I know you did an awful lot of research for your book about what actually happens when companies give their employees or their workforce more flexibility. And I'm just wondering if you could just talk very briefly through the kind of headline findings from your research, since I think it's really instructive and helpful for us all to hear.
Sure. Well, I think the myth of when we work from home, we shirk from home has finally been disbanded, because reported productivity, even during the pandemic, have either stayed the same or gone up. So hopefully we can put that one to bed, that productivity doesn't only happen when we're all sat in the same four walls. It can happen elsewhere. It doesn't need to be at home. It can be working from anywhere or working to your own hours. Also, it's shown that when you offer workers autonomy over their own time, their job satisfaction and retention goes up. So flexible workers, high levels of job satisfaction and commitment, they're more likely to increase discretionary effort compared to those who do not work flexibly. And the CIPD has done some research to show that it has a really positive impact on retention as well. Mental health as well. There was a recent study by Flex Jobs in association with Mental Health America, and they found that 80% of participants believe that when you have a bit more flexibility around the way that you work, it allows you to take care of yourself and the people around you and your mental health. Now, I think with all of this, we need to just dig into the fact that it is exactly that, it's genuine autonomy. As everybody said, there's some working through a pandemic, working from home, enforced working from home has not been the elixir of flex that we'd hoped it would be. It's been stressful and anxious, and people have felt lonely. So we're really talking about when flex works at its best, it has all these wonderful side effects for the business and the individual.
Thank you, Annie. Sorry, the questions are all coming in fast. I want to return to one of our earlier questions, actually, which came from Sinead Jeffries, different Sinead. What would the panel see as the best possible outcome on flexibility if we were to look ahead to 1 year's time? And just give Annie a break for a minute. Could I go to Rania or Sinead? Whoever would like to take that.
For us at Channel 4, we want to be able to hit all our KPIs, so our standard measurements, but the key one to all of us is going to be the staff engagement score as well. So hitting the commercial and business targets that we need to hit, hitting the creative targets that we need to hit and that we measure ourselves by, but also seeing a marked increase in staff engagement and improvements in our inclusion and diversity.
Fantastic. Very, very precise answer as well. Thank you. Rania, I don't know if you caught the question. The question was, what would you see as the best possible outcome on flexibility if we were to look ahead 1 year from now? What would be the best possible outcome?
Oh, wow. I think I feel very positive about where we're going to end up with it. But I think probably I'm going to echo a lot of the things that Sinead said, which is more flexibility, greater retention of women, higher levels of staff satisfaction. And actually, I think I probably caught a lot of the same points Sinead made, but I think that's the kind of real opportunity there.
Fantastic, thank you. Don't worry, I've got a dog too. They can do that. It's just what they do. So, just a question from Louise Patel, a question for you, Sinead. She is a freelance producer of 17 years experience. She's been campaigning for flexibility for freelancers for many years. And she's wondering how Channel 4 thought about how they can offer these flexible benefits to their freelancer workforce.
We have we don't have a significant freelancer workforce because we're a publisher broadcaster, so we don't make any of our programs, as Louise will know. We buy them from production companies, but we want to share our learnings from all of this with the companies that we work with, and we'll find ways to do that. I agree that it's very difficult as a freelancer to get that sense of flexibility. I guess what we do to help is we work with organisations like Women in TV and Film. We work with media parents. We try to find other ways to support freelancers, and particularly female freelancers. And recently, you know, in the middle of lockdown, we ran a 4-week training program with an FTS aimed at freelancers to try and give extra support and skills and knowledge. So not as easy for us as other organizations because our freelance contingent is so small, but yeah, very, very supportive of your point, and happy to spread our learnings with our industry as a whole.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sinead. Thank you so much to our panel. That was wonderful. We are going to do a very quick closing poll, which is more personal, I think, about how we all feel about flexible working, which should come up on your screens in a second. We'll just have 30 seconds tops to answer it. Be reassured that the poll is anonymous, and we'll share the results on screen in a moment. Again, very much in keeping actually with the opening, I think almost the exact same percentage for the most positive statement. I'm already working flexibly and feel confident about making it work. And I'm very glad to see that 39% of you feel more confident than you were an hour ago. That's winning as far as I'm concerned. Fantastic. Great stuff. Right, without further ado, the amazing Catherine Becker, campaigning chair at WACL 2021 and head of media at EA Games, is going to just canter through at great speed and brilliant succinctness a little bit of advice about how to make the future of work flexibly for you.
Thanks so much, Mel. That was brilliant. And thanks to all our panelists too. Really insightful learnings there. I'm Catherine Becker. I'm campaigning chair at WACL 2020 and 2021 and EU head of media at Electronic Arts. So let's just spend the last couple of minutes of this session talking about the essential actions all organisations can take to build back better, which is a phrase we've heard a lot today. Actions we unpack in WACL's free Flexible First checklist, which is backed by ISBA and the IPA, which we invite everyone on this call to use to help check your organisation's progress. You can find the checklist at the address on screen, and Jess will be putting that link in the chat now too. So first, the media narrative would suggest that the future of work is all about a binary choice between the office and lockdown style working from home. And we've seen today that's clearly not the case. Necessity has been the mother of invention. Leadership boards across categories have seen what is possible when remote workforces, whilst naturally missing the benefits of being together in person, as we've heard today, can do. What we've heard from our speakers today, and indeed is panning out as we come out of lockdown, is that a hybrid approach is a far more likely solution. Second, what's also clear is that hybrid working is not a silver bullet. Hybrid brings with it the promise of the best of both worlds, but we do appreciate it also brings complexity, because one thing is definite: one size does not fit all. The clear recommendation we've heard today is for organisations to embrace flexible working in all its forms from the top. We need to adopt a test and learn approach on hybrid working to see what works best for your workforce. Flexible working and the future of work is also about so much more than location. So here are some other considerations taken from our WACL Flexible First checklist that our research has shown are the major drivers of success to deliver a happy and contented team. So first of all, collaborative technology. Remote or even hybrid working requires that the right technology is in place to optimize team collaboration. Invest in it properly and the ROI will be worth it. A pain point for many organizations is going to be how to collaborate effectively with a workforce in different locations. So do anticipate that need. Secondly, employee support systems. The best-in-class organisations also recognise that it is important to support flexible workers in other ways, from employee interest groups, through specialist support initiatives for workers returning after career breaks. Whilst on average 70% of workers say they want a hybrid model in future, there will be 1 in 3 colleagues who struggle with this. We've also seen from a recent IPA survey out this month that 89% of UK workers would be happiest with a fully flexible approach to returning to the office. The best organisations will accommodate all needs. Thirdly, leadership training. Leading in the post-COVID era will require new skills. Help your top team to manage remote workers better and to embed a healthy culture, rewarding output, not presenteeism, again, which we've heard a lot about today. And remember, the new normal will take time to adjust, so set expectations properly. And finally, metrics. They say you get what you measure. And as flexible working at scale is new to many organisations, it is really important to get clarity on the impact on productivity, on recruitment and retention, on costs, on employee engagement and well-being, and ultimately how you are impacting your diversity and inclusion targets. By agreeing the metrics, then everyone can see what is and what isn't working for employees and employers. So please do share WACL's full Flexible First checklist, backed by CMI and ISBA, with your colleagues. Certainly, how we respond now could either set the equality movement back at least a decade, or organisations could build back better and give equality the acceleration it needs. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much to our speakers, to our event organisers today, and to you, the audience, for coming, for listening, and for sharing your questions. And again, please do share the full Flexible First checklist with your colleagues. You can find it alongside our toolkit and case study interviews by visiting wacl.info. Thank you again very much, and goodbye.